This is Cyra at Medics Money, and I am so excited to welcome Vivek and Rob from the BMA. So, just a little intro from me. I'm your friendly neighborhood host at Medics Money. I'm a chartered accountant and a doctor and a trainee, which is why I have a vested interest in this conversation. And I've got a lot of difficult questions I'll be throwing at them. Vivek, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Vivek Trivedi. I'm an anaesthetic doctor in the Northwest, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the BMA UK Junior Doctors Committee, soon to be called BMA UK Resident Doctors Committee.
Hi, I'm Rob. I was a GP registrar 2 years ago when this all kicked off, but in February of this year, I finally got around to finishing my training in and amongst the backdrop of the national dispute. But I am also one of the co-chairs of the committee, and I think it's important as well because a lot of the conversations that I've had over the last week is that I have a non-voting seat for the committee next year.
Congratulations on your CCT. That's fantastic. So I'm going to jump straight in. I have been approached by a lot of my colleagues with lots of different questions as well, especially coming from the finance side of things. So I've tried to incorporate all of those questions as well. I thought it would be actually quite useful, first of all, if we could actually break down the offer that you're putting forward in the context of what's already happened and then what's going to happen, because I think that 22% figure on the BBC is a little bit misleading.
Sure, I can jump in on that. So as you listeners will undoubtedly be aware, doctors have had a series of real terms pay cuts over the last 14 years. We started a campaign to restore that pay, to fully restore that pay. At the start of the campaign, we were 26% behind inflation compared to 2008 in RPI levels, which most of our colleagues face. We actually underwent an intense year of inflation, and we were in 2022, 2023, towards the end of it, we were 31.7% behind inflation at that point. We started a trade dispute with the government because they were ignoring our concerns about pay and the effects that it has on our colleagues. And we've undergone a series of strike actions over the last 15 to 16 months with multiple rounds of negotiations in that time as well. And in summary, because of our strike action, we were awarded an average 8.8% uplift in 23-24 from a DDRB recommendation, which is unheard of. In the years prior to that, from 2008 to 2022, the average DDRB recommendation for us was actually only 1.6%. So this is a huge jump. We had some further negotiations with the government, but unfortunately we're unable to get an offer that our committee deemed credible to put to doctors. We had a general election just a couple of months ago, when are we now? Yeah. And we have had negotiations with the Labour government and have had an offer put to us. And I'll describe that in a moment. But in and amongst that time, we have now been cited and been told that about the DDRB. So this is the Doctors and Dentists Review Body, which is the supposedly independent pay review body for us, which recommends our pay uplifts, has awarded us an average 8% for 24-25, which would lead to a cumulative uplift of 17.7% over these 2 years that our dispute has been ongoing and that we've been taking fairly substantial strike action. On top of that, what the government is offering, and this is where some of the numbers get confusing and it has been misleading from the media, the government is offering an average 4.05% backdated for the year 23-24, so for the previous financial year. This is much more evenly spread out. We can go into this in a little bit more detail. It would different to how the previous governments structured their deals. So it would mean that all doctors would have above inflation pay rises for years 23-24, when inflation in RPI was 11.4%, and for the year 24-25, as well as a lump sum payment for the back pay, depending on when people worked. And on top of the pay aspects, there are some non-pay aspects. So we have discussed and agreed potential reforms to the exception reporting systems, which has an underlying ethos to empower doctors and trust them to conduct themselves professionally, removing the time-consuming and administrative processes, steps from that process, and most importantly, removing the supervisor sign-off aspect from the exception report, which when speaking to colleagues we know is a huge barrier preventing them from submitting it and effectively reclaiming their time. So this would go some ways to allowing doctors to do that. And there's finally been some acknowledgement from some serious stakeholders about other issues which really affect doctors, such as the nature and way we have to rotate, and so it would prompt a review to address and even redesign curriculums, should we need to, about rotational training. And actually, and similarly related to that, about acknowledging the intense bottlenecks we have in terms of training numbers for doctors to progress. And so it's would prompt a review into that to ensure that doctors who are starting their career, who make decisions when in GCSE time, A-level time, are able to progress to become consultants without having to be stuck at various stages in between.
Thank you, Vivek, for that breakdown. That's really helpful. One of the other things I wanted to ask you actually is, how have you felt with these negotiations, speaking from people with the last government to speaking with this government? So Rob, I actually just wanted to know, how did you find the talks with the new government versus the old one?
Well, the old government, particularly after December, kept going round and round in circles and setting up multiple red lines on their own side, which conflicted with each other, which left no space for the conversations to really progress. And there was a real sense that the government actually just wanted us to take strike action so that they had someone to blame and someone to keep fighting against. And they'd made a political decision to take that gamble, which I think in the end they probably lost. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that we won. And that was really frustrating, because actually settling our dispute, pay restoration, has enormous benefits, not just obviously for us, but it has great benefits to the government in terms of setting up a multi-year deal, which is what we were always hoping to achieve, so that they could have security and doctors could have security for the future. But then they just chose to double down and not move. And that was a real shame. So the next government, when they came into power, the Secretary of State phoned us the very next day and invited us into talks on the following Tuesday. We went round, we had a discussion about what went wrong and why things stalled and what they might be able to do better. And then the Thursday afterwards, we had a conversation about what the talks might include, the sorts of things that we might want to talk about, and the time frame. And that's when we came out with the deadline of August 16th, which is one of our executive meetings. But actually, the Secretary of State said on that meeting he had a mandate and he was prepared to negotiate, and he was hoping to wrap things up quicker. So we entered into negotiations the following week, and this is the negotiations took place Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for a whole week, talking about the year 24-25, and the government actually gave us sight of the DDRB before it was published, and that was after they had leaked the DDRB, the peer review bodies for teachers and nurses. So I think they were leaking those things to show us that we were going to get, again, a fairly substantial increase when you put it into context of the average 1.6% that we were getting between 2008 and 2022. And that was a really interesting step forwards, because the previous government in May last year, we knew they had the DDRB. They refused to share the DDRB, and they offered us 5%. And they did that knowing the DDRB was offering us 8.8 last year. So that was an entirely bad faith move from the previous government. This was a much better faith move from this government. And actually, it demonstrated that the DDRB had been influenced by the strikes. They did recognize the issues that doctors were facing, the strength of feeling, and the low morale. And it was finally taken into account when they came up with their pay recommendation. So that was really positive. But then we moved on to talking about both the future years and 23-24. And the government was basically put a red line down and said that they want to restore confidence in the peer review body process. And so they were unwilling to commit to anything in the future. What we were able to achieve was a remit letter for the next DDRB. And this is the instruction from the government to the DDRB to make another pay recommendation, which happens on an annual basis. And this letter, interestingly, it starts off by saying the government acknowledges concerns raised by the BMA and others that medicine is not as an attractive career as it once was. And that is the absolute closest that the government's ever going to come towards the words pay erosion and pay restoration. But I think it is an interesting acknowledgement and admission on the government's behalf, which we've never had before. And I think that does set up the framework for the next 4 years, that the government acknowledges that things weren't attractive as before, which allows us to keep pushing towards pay restoration. And I understand there's a lot of concern from members about thinking this is the end of pay restoration, this is the end of the dispute, right? And I think there's a conflation here of ideas. Dispute is a legal term, and what it just means is that it allows us to have a ballot and ballot for industrial action and take strike action. And what we're proposing with the recommendation for an accept offer is that we bank this deal, we build on it, we end the dispute for the current financial year, but pay restoration is not over, and we want to go again in 25-26 if the DDRB fails, either fails in making a recommendation on time, which is in April, or fails to make a recommendation that's high enough and actually begins to slow down the rate towards pay restoration. And on this point, my final point, because I've been rambling a lot, what's really interesting from my perspective, right, and this is an exclusive reveal, if you like, I put a subject access request in to the Department of Health and Social Care. And you may remember that we came on Medics Money last year to talk about the pay restoration campaign. On the 10th of March, the Department of Health and Social Care sent an email to the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party referencing this podcast and our last episode, and they specifically quoted us and me saying, "I would like to see doctors being prepared to organise in the long term more to fight a plethora of issues that we face. We may need to persevere and persist and keep contributing through all sorts of ways over an extended period of time. Because what we want to do," and I'll say it again so DHSC can send this to the Labour Party this time, "is we want to build a union that is organised, ready to mobilise at the drop of a hat to be able to defend our pay, because we can never tolerate a single year of pay erosion ever again."
The fight is not over. That is what I've got from what Rob just said, which is really positive to hear. And I think we'll actually address the majority of the concerns over this particular pay deal at the moment, because I think from the messages I've been receiving, there is that concern, is the fight over? Are we just lying down and taking this? But I do agree that actually the offer that we've been given is one of the best we've been given thus far, given what we have on average been offered previously. It's also really positive to hear that the atmosphere within which you're having these negotiations is a lot more open and it's a lot more transparent, which I think is something us doctors really value as well, and hopefully will go some way to restoring some faith, I think. So one of the things I was asked was, there's no commitment to full pay restoration in this offer, as there was with Scotland's offer. They actually did commit for it. So what is your take on that, and how do you feel you'll be addressing that concern?
So I think it's important to note a couple of things. The dynamic and the relationship between us and our government is different compared to our colleagues in Scotland and their government. There is definitely more trust between the Scottish doctors and their government, which means that such commitments, which do look like they are playing out, have more credibility. In the absence of earned trust from our government, because they've not yet done anything that means we should trust what they say. Even if we had a commitment, would that be enough? Would it be the right thing to take our foot off the pedal, and not be ready to hold them to account? It absolutely wouldn't. And our own lived history is testament to that. And unfortunately, what we've learned with our UK government is that the only people that we can trust and that we should trust is ourselves, our colleagues, and our union. To trust ourselves to re-enter dispute any and every year that we need to, if there's an uplift or process misstep that takes us off our path to full pay restoration. Because, and you've mentioned it before, and Rob mentioned it too, it's not just pay. There's lots of other things that we need to do to reclaim our professional working lives. So the fight does not stop with pay, and we need to be prepared to keep going. And banking wins at each step as we go on and restore the rest of our profession. With time, there might be a situation that we've seen in trade union history that governments then do come to understand that there is credibility in what the union is doing. They will come back again and again. It will then at some point become less of an issue for them or less hassle for them to not put things off and to address things sooner rather than later. But at the moment, we don't have that relationship with our government. They're refusing to do so. If we wanted, a multi-year pay deal, then the Treasury are not inclined to unlock that sort of funding for us. It would require far more leverage than we are currently exerting. Or, like Rob mentioned, we bank, we build, we come back stronger every year. And what can happen in this year, and what can happen every successive year, is that our organising capacity can increase. So that means we can get more doctors involved with the BMA. Our membership grows. That means our collective action grows. We get more doctors trained to become representatives, to be supporting their colleagues at local levels, regional levels, national levels. We're now building a central BMA strike fund that isn't reliant on donations, that empowers more of our colleagues to take action should they need to. But this is all moving to a situation where in the future, we won't even need to take strike action because the strength of our resolve will be known. And that's the future for doctors that I see.
It's an extremely valid point. Just because they say they'll commit to pay restoration doesn't mean they will. Our mandates have clearly not been met in the past. Why should they be met in future? There is no trust there.
Exactly. And so we are seeing things pan out Scotland in a positive fashion. We know that the government hasn't committed to RPI, but they are making seemingly credible progress. We saw promise in Wales from their Labour government, which was rowed back on almost immediately, which just goes to show that words are just words. Actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely. In terms of the BMA and its reputation, unfortunately, things did plummet in the 2016 discussions, and I think that was a lot to do with the things Rob was talking about as well, actually, that we were facing a bit of a brick wall. How do you feel the current talks will impact the reputation of the BMA?
So I think what's clearly a challenge that we've identified is that even despite 22 months in dispute, 11 rounds of strike action, the media continuously misrepresenting things, misunderstanding and writing stories that just miss the point, is that the leak that occurred on Monday set fire to the membership in terms of being able to understand exactly what we were trying to do here, which is essentially we've been really clear throughout, right? And we published the exact wording of the deal that was negotiated in the room, as well as trying to communicate with members the road ahead. And I understand the legacy of 2016 and the scar on the back and the mistrust and the reputational damage from the BMA. And I had hoped that we had demonstrated enough over the last 22 months or so that things are different and that we have a plan, we have strategies, and we scenario plan for a range of events. And we wanted to be able to communicate that to members, but because of the leak, we were pipped to it. And I hope that people take the time to listen and understand that we're not saying that this is the end of FPR. What we're saying is there are two roads to FPR. There's reject and escalate now against what we think are pretty strong political headwinds, right? We think at the moment, in this immediate short-term period, where basically Labour are wanting to destroy the economic credibility of the Conservatives, throw them under the bus for everything, say everything that they've inherited is all their fault, there's no money left, and blah, blah, blah. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the actual economics of those arguments, which essentially is what the Conservative government did when they came into power, and look where we are, is not the point. The point is that this is how the Labour Party are building up their political position and how they're going to fight off everyone else whilst using the shield of the last government's sort of chaos and mistakes to deflect all negative attention. So we think it would be easier and better to bank this deal, build on top of it, and ballot again in the future. And we're only talking about 8 months. Now, that's April 2025. It's a new financial year. That's 8 months away. To put that into perspective, the last offer we received was 8 months ago, right? This is not a loss of momentum and inertia. It doesn't have to be. In fact, this is a moment in time to consolidate, strategize, and move forwards in a positive direction. But both roads potentially lead to pay restoration. It's just about being able to communicate that with members. And so I'd ask people to afford us some the courtesy of listening to us explain the strategies and why we think accepting is the best way forwards.
If we do accept, what is you must have some points in your minds of when you will start to reconsider industrial actions if the promises aren't met. What do these look like?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So if Streeting wants to restore confidence in the peer review body process, then the first thing that must happen is that the DDRB must publish its recommendation in April 2025. That's when it's supposed to. That's when it's always supposed to. But it's been failing on that front because the government of the day has always been submitting their evidence late. And as a consequence, that's pushed back the time schedule. Now, if that happens, it's my opinion, and Vivek and I will both be on the committee next year. It's my opinion that we should enter a dispute that if it's a day late. There's also another opportunity to enter a dispute, which is if the DDRB recommendation is not high enough and it takes us off the trajectory towards pay restoration. That should also issue a dispute, and at that point, definitely a ballot. And that's when we will be able to remobilize based on the organization that we want everyone to be doing over the next 8 months anyway. We need people to be building the WhatsApp groups. We need people to be talking to their colleagues, going up and down the wards. We need people to be updating their BMA details on their profile. Firstly, right now, so that they get the referendum email link, by the way, if you do not have a place of work on your BMA account, you will not get the email for the referendum. So that's really important. But secondly, the ballots are postal for the time being. And the last little bit I just want to say on that is the government, currently their plans, and they haven't U-turned yet at least, but currently their plans are to introduce electronic ballots. There's a real possibility that in the future, with electronic ballots, we'll be able to be much more successful at securing those mandates and being able to be on an equal footing or a more equal footing with the government when we go back to negotiate.
That's really helpful to hear. And I think the reason you're mentioning this is because of turnout, isn't it? So we need to get as many members of the BMA actually voting. And I understand postal votes can be a barrier to that. So actually at the moment, if we can do a call to arms a little bit to please do your postal votes when this goes out, but there is hopefully electronic voting coming soon, which then means that it'll be easier to vote in the future.
Yes, and actually so this is my personal feelings about the ballot results. I'm not worried about the ballot result and what that translates into, okay, in terms of leverage. I think we will still win a ballot, okay? I think people do need to get engaged, though. They do need to get as high a turnout as possible, and we should not be complacent. But I just want to reflect on what I've heard and seen online, because actually I disagree, even though I want to vote accept. I do not think we're in a weak position or a weaker position compared to us, like comparing ourselves to us 6 months ago, a year ago. I just think the government's in a different position. And it's really important to conceptualize this, because I think a lot of people are approaching the deal about the figures and the money on the table compared to the cost of the strikes alone. And that would ordinarily work if we were dealing with a business. If we were hitting a business and their bottom line and they were hemorrhaging money and becoming unsustainable, they would have to settle. But we're not dealing with the business. We are dealing with politicians who make political decisions for a wide range of reasons, not just financial cost. They do not want to be seen as economically incredible, or rather, they don't want to be seen as signaling a green light to each and every other single union and inciting industrial action across the landscape. And so that's why I think they're really going to dig in at this moment in time. But I actually think in 8 months' time, that grip is going to weaken. Coming back to the ballot results, our first ballot result, our turnout was 77%, right? Record-breaking, absolutely incredible in the context of, firstly, the BMA and the legacy, and secondly, the fact that we rotate and have a postal ballot system at the moment. The second ballot, the turnout went down to about 72%, but that was only because we had so many more members. We actually had 9,000 more yes votes. Now, the third ballot, yes, the turnout dropped even further, and that can't be explained by anything. But actually, if we look at the strike participation, pretty much held up between July compared to February, which is really where we're generating leverage, right? But what we're saying is not that we're weaker, because I just don't believe that. I really don't. What we're saying is that our strike action, because of the balance of power, is just going to give us marginal gain, much less marginal gains, because we're really hitting diminishing returns at the moment. And that's why we just think building and banking, go again in 8 months, go again for 25-26, which is uncontested at the moment, is the right thing to do.
Just to come in on that and highlight a few other points. So what we've seen in the last 2 years is that our strike action has had a huge impact on our pay. This offer, if accepted, would mean that we would have a 22.3% uplift over these 2 years. But of that 22.3%, 17.7% has come from the recommendations of the pay review body. Now, that's an easy way for the government to hide an uplift and to say, we didn't want to give this, but this is what the independent pay review body is giving. And it helps reduce fears of spreading into other sectors, for example. And it makes far more sense there's actually a mutually beneficial situation for that to occur. And that's why extracting money directly from the government is difficult to begin with, and that's evidenced by the levels of the offers that we've received over these last 2 years. And just to build on that point specifically, there's lots of people saying, oh, you should reject the first offer. This is not the first offer. We've actually had 3 offers from just the Labour government. This is just the first offer that's coming to members. But even those offers built from the offers that we'd had from the Conservative government, because whilst the politicians have changed, the civil servants are the same, negotiating style and format, all of that is the same, and the offers are built from that. But our leverage has had an impact on the DDRB, and that's where we should be focusing our efforts, especially because of the increased difficulty to extract further concessions from the government now, which, as Rob was saying, is in a stronger position than they were before. But that kind of ties into something I wanted to say, again, coming back on comments that I've seen from other people about pausing would lead to a loss of momentum. We wouldn't, and the fear or concern that we wouldn't be able to come back in 8 months' time or so. Rob describes us having a record-breaking mandate in February 2023, which we did, and the ballot opens for that in January. We took up office in October 2022, and at that point there was an expectation that we were going to release a ballot or start a ballot immediately as part of this full pay restoration campaign. What we were told when we took up office from the BMA team, because we were new to all of this, was that 0% of hospitals around the country were ballot ready. We had to make a difficult decision to not open the ballot then and actually organise. And we had 4 months of serious and intense organising, all grassroots level stuff, going out and speaking to doctors in one way or another. And that enabled us to get that record-breaking mandate. And that was in 4 months, right? Momentum, whether you agree or disagree with it as a concept in this sense, is ultimately about organisation. And we should never let that go because, as we were saying before, it's not just pay. There's a whole host of other issues that we need to address. And if we were able to achieve that in 4 months, giving ourselves even longer gives us an even better chance at being able to support, empower, enable our colleagues to feel more involved with the campaign than they have been before. And then there's also the financial aspect that I talked about before that too. There's also a concern about not being able to come back in the future because of what it might look like having accepted an offer and then disputing a future one, for example. Ultimately, the media will always try and find ways to attack you. Your opposition will always try to find ways to attack you. Rob, myself, other people who've gone out and done interviews have had various different attacks. There's many things that I think are helpful in our situation, not least what the government have already said. So Rob's talking about Wes Streeting want to restore confidence in the pay review body process. That's something that he said to us a number of times. We've heard him talk about a journey to fair pay. He acknowledges that doctors' pay has fallen behind inflation. He said that privately and publicly. And he said that the remedy for that is a journey, not an event. This offer, if accepted, would be an event. By definition, we wouldn't be completing the journey, and there is clear expectations from both sides that does continue. And in fact, the way that he's envisaging it continuing is restoring our confidence in the DDRB. There are clear grounds why we would not have confidence in the DDRB, as Rob was talking about before, and allow us to open a dispute. What the current dispute is about 23-24 and 24-25. If we accept this offer, we're accepting that we're happy with those 2 years alone, but nothing else. It does not say that we're happy about the rest of the pay erosion that we've undergone, and it doesn't say that we're happy about what's going to happen in the future. It says we're going to see what happens. That's almost exactly what the question will be, that we'll be asking doctors when it comes to the referendum. It's whether 23, 24, 24, 25 is acceptable, and we'll stop strikes for now before we look at 25, 26 to continue our journey to full pay restoration.
Yeah, and like Vivek, I've had loads of conversations with people worried about momentum and inertia and things like that. And actually, I want people to take some of the emotion out of it, out of the agitation to get people out there to vote and to organise and take strike action. And I want people to become more disciplined. I want people to just appreciate that there's a strategy behind it. It makes sense. Actually, yes, we need to vote, we need to take strike action, and we're not going to go to work in order to continue restoring our pay. I don't want people to be making decisions out of emotion or irrationality or fear. I want people to understand that actually the union is changing, and if people are worried about momentum, then I just want to challenge them and say, help us organize. Get out there, talk to people, get people on the WhatsApps, get people online, get people where the information is, share the information, inform and inspire people. And that's how we're going to be able to build a bigger, better, and more sustainable union. Because we need to break this myth that we're a once-in-a-generation striking union. It should have nothing to do with the generational aspect. It should have nothing to do with the time frame and how frequently or not that we strike in of its own right. It should be all about how are we as a profession going to be prepared to defend our pay and conditions as and when they're infringed, right? So we should be able to get to a position where the union identifies a problem, a threat, an issue, calls for a ballot at the drop of a hat. It should not need 4 months of campaigning to get ready. Everyone should be informed, everyone should be prepared every single year. If there's an issue, a problem, the union leadership, whoever it might be at the time, says now is an important time to take strike action, get the ballots out, get people voting, get it returned, right? We need to be much more agile. And something I think is important just to comment on and reflect on as well is that before our first ballot, Vivek and I said, we're going to call for a 72-hour full walkout, right? And that was breaking a precedent, right? Doctors had never taken a full walkout, let alone on continuous days. And we did that because we were confident that we had a plan that we were going to be able to execute. And we weren't interested in trying to play both sides of all kinds of doctors, of all kinds of beliefs with regards to how best to approach things. We had a plan. We had a strategy, we announced it, and we wanted to bring people with us. And that's what we're doing this time as well. We have a plan for an accept vote, and we believe it's the best thing to do, and we want to bring people with us because we're not going away next year. We're both still on the committee. So we can both continue to deliver on this medium and long-term plan, which is ultimately going to have, the shadow of this dispute, this campaign, and what we're building. The legacy of it is going to last, hopefully, decades, because we're going to be able to bring the next generation, 2 or 3 years of F1s essentially, with us in this mindset change of having to take action, what it means, how to challenge your employer over X, Y, and Z things, and then how to win. And when we begin to bank those wins, we'll be able to actually show people this is the way.
Thanks, Rob. That's brilliant. Who can vote and how and when?
So the referendum will be an online one because it doesn't have to be a statutory ballot. We're just confirming up the dates with Civica, who's the third party, independent party that will be running the referendum for us. It will be open for 3 to 4 weeks. We're just confirming that at the moment, and it will open sometime mid-August and close mid-September. The dates will likely be released later this week. Any junior doctor working now can vote, a resident doctor, but the big name change will be coming in September. Additional doctors who can vote are those who have CCT'd within this dispute, but took part in the dispute. So if you were a junior doctor at any point between March 2023 and the day that the referendum opened, and you took part in strike action and you're part of the dispute, you will also be included within the vote. Now, the vote, to be sent an email link with an individual unique voting link, the system needs to recognize you as one of those two things, as a current junior doctor or as one who's CCT'd within that time period. That means the BMA needs to know all of your details, and they need to be up to date. Most important, your place of work. If you do not get a voting link, we'll be releasing information on how you can speak to reps or BMA staff in order to get one, and we'll make sure that the system then does recognize you and sends you a link. We just want to highlight another thing that Rob said, that updating your details now is also important, not just for this referendum, but for any potential ballots that we will need to undertake for strike action in the future.
And so it's only BMA members?
Yes, sorry, I should have made clear. So it's only BMA members who can vote. You can join at the moment. The BMA's got a promotion going on at the moment where if you join now, you can have your first 3 months of membership for free. But it's BMA members who will be able to vote.
Rob, I understand that part of the offer is there's a condition that you have to recommend this. Are you recommending it because of that, or how do you feel?
Yeah, great question. We didn't have to take this deal to the committee, and the committee didn't have to take it to the membership, right? And there was a lot of concern about multiple aspects of the deal in the committee, and it was not a unanimous vote, although there was a majority vote to put this through to members. The recommendation says that you must strongly or firmly and consistently recommend it, right? But that doesn't prohibit people from just staying silent if they wanted to stay silent. I think Vivek's previously described it as saying that the BMA could just put out a tweet saying, here's a deal, we recommend it. But we do genuinely believe that this is the right course of action to take at this moment in time. A lot of people have been quoting and throwing back in my face something that I said over a year ago, which is where I said that we might be forced to take a deal to the membership, and if it's less than FPR, vote it down. And I truly believed that at that moment in time, because I truly believed that the last government wouldn't be so reckless or careless, and it genuinely was an easy win for them to settle, particularly in the context of Sunak having one of his 5 pledges about getting the waiting lists down. But they didn't. They cut their nose off to spite their face. They threw the baby out with the bathwater, and now we're the other side of the general election, and things have changed. They really have. And I've said it before, I don't believe that we're weaker. I just think that the government is a little bit stronger than the government was 6-12 months ago. And that's why I've had to change my mind. But I do genuinely and sincerely think this is the right course of action to take.
Yeah, and just to expand, we have said no to other deals, and the committee has also said no. Notably, we talked about the deal that we offered in December, and we did say no to that. But like Rob says, there was a strong majority that wanted to put this to members with that recommendation. So knowing that we would have to recommend it, and that's because, like Rob says, genuinely do think this is the best route to full pay restoration. There's nothing obliging Rob and myself to come onto this show with you and to talk about it. There's nothing obliging us to do the webinars that we're doing this week or next week, or trying to get our thoughts across. But we do genuinely think this is the best way forward and want people to try and understand that from our perspective.
So what you're saying is that you could have actually not even agreed to put this to the members. You didn't even have to put this to the members. You've put it to the members with that caveat because you genuinely believe it's the right course of action at this point in time.
Exactly. We even said to the government, having a clause like this will lead to scepticism amongst our committee, amongst members, and there's a higher likelihood of it being, or it'll be viewed less negatively without this clause, but ultimately that was their condition. But despite that, assessing the offer in the circumstances we're in is what has led us to recommend this offer.
There was something else, though, which is that when the deal was finalised on Friday and we were putting it to committee on Saturday, there was an intimation that, and we appreciate this was a negotiating tactic, we were cognizant of it and we kept that into account when we weighed this up. There was the suggestion, the reason why they wanted that time frame was because on Monday the Chancellor was going to announce recommending all of the public sector pay review bodies, which were all above inflation. Ours was just quite a bit above inflation. Inflation was 3.3 by RPI for the year 23-24, and our uplift is an average 8%, right? So in real terms, a fair bit above inflation. And there was the intimation that if it wasn't accepted and put to members, it's quite possible the government would have turned around and said they're still in direct negotiations with the junior doctors. And as a consequence, it's quite possible they wouldn't have accepted the DDRB. Now, we will never know the truth of that. What we do know now is that the DDRB has been accepted by the Chancellor. She said it in Parliament. It would be pretty much impossible to go against that now. And we're open, we're honest, we're transparent about this. You are only voting for that extra 4.05% on top of the 8.8% for 23-24, okay, with some of those extra reforms. There is a little bit of compounding that goes into the 24-25 DDRB recommendation as a consequence. And of course, that 4% last year is a permanent uplift, so it will compound for the rest of your resident doctor career. But I think that is important actually for people to know when they evaluate and appreciate some of the context that we were working under as well.
And in terms of just separating, I think this is really important because I understand that the DDRB is a separate entity to what the government's saying. And what we're doing, I think what can happen is that can be conflated sometimes, that we're voting for this number, this result, and we want it to come from one place, but that's not how it's going to happen. We need the DDRB to continuously and fairly review our pay and make sure that our remuneration is appropriate as we go along. And what we need is not for the government to go, okay, we'll give you full pay restoration now, because they can easily go back on that. What we need is a DDRB to actually be on our side. And that's a different entity, I think.
It's really interesting because you're right in that there are we're, I suppose, in some ways in a fortunate position in that we have two parties. We can influence the DDRB and we can influence the government, okay? But ultimately, all of the money comes from the same place, okay? It's going to come from the Treasury. What we need to continue doing is continuing influencing both. And the DDRB it's a double-edged sword in its own right, because the government can hide behind it when they want to say that, the doctor's pay is being cut because of an independent pay review body. But they can also hide behind it when it gives us uplifts, because they can say, but is the independent pay review body. And so it's all about trying to influence that process and trying to be able to extract the most that we can so that we can complete our destination to pay restoration. How we do that needs to be done tactfully and strategically with timing appropriately, because 1 day of strike action at one point in the year is going to have less leverage and effect on the DDRB than 1 day of strike action at another point in the year. They write their reports in the first sort of 2 quarters of the year. In fact, you can actually determine, if you look at the 50-second DDRB report, and I recommend everyone does. It's really interesting reading because there's some interesting analysis. I think it's the first time that they've actually calculated the difference in CPI between 2010 and now, and the difference in the pay uplifts for resident doctors between 2010 and now as well. So it's really interesting. They're beginning to look at this whole concept of pay erosion. Now, they're using 2010, not 2008, and they're using CPI, not RPI, but they are looking at this concept, which is really interesting. But they also comment that there was strike action planned for June, July, which means that the report was still being written after the point the general election had been announced, because we announced those strikes after the general election had been announced. So it's all really interesting. And these are the kind of nuances and details and specifics that Vivek and I have spent like the last 2 years consumed with, because it is literally our job in our role as chairs of the committee. And that's why we want people to understand that we've thought about this in such a tremendous depth, from all sorts of pockets of information, whether it's direct from members, reps, whether it's BMA reports from our staff, whether it's public affairs teams and their interactions with the political parties and how they're thinking, how things are developing, the media and how the narrative is being shaped, what decisions politicians are making, and what decisions things like the DRB are making. We have this great which we're able to look down on and assess and evaluate all of this information. And this is our conclusion. And we just hope that people come with us on that journey.
Brilliant. That was really informative. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that I don't think I'd fully understood. I'd read all the stuff released from the BMA, and I think the issue that we were having is the communications, to make them as diplomatic as possible, ended up not actually addressing the concern that this isn't over, and that this is... I did read that about banking and moving forward, but actually hearing from you that your plan is not to let this rest, to actually address the last 2 years and then actually see what happens next, is very reassuring for me personally. And I hope people listening will also find that useful as well. But we would love to hear your thoughts, so please do get in touch with us. I'm cyra@medicsmoney.co.uk. I would love to receive your emails. And any parting words, Vivek and Rob?
I suppose to sum up my view in this is that the offer itself could go much further. I think we all recognise that an additional 4.05% does not go all the way. It's not full pay restoration. We are recommending to accept this offer, not based on the substance, but based on the circumstances that we're in. Because of the shift in leverage with the new government compared to where we were with the old government and where we are at the moment. But even that aside, even this little shift aside, the prospect of banking wins along the way and incrementally working towards your goal is something we've seen replicated in the trade unions that are successful. That's what we've seen train drivers do. That's what we've seen other unions do in the past. And that is the culture that the BMA is shifting towards. That's what I see doctors wanting to do, because it's not just pay. There's lots of other issues that we need to improve on. And we can only do that if we continue sticking together, because it's our unity that's allowed us to gain this progress so far, and it's only our unity that will allow us to continue building on this, to not just reclaim our pay, but all of the other aspects of our professional working lives too.
Yeah, and I just want to add that for many doctors, we go through school and then a degree and then onto a training program, and we are conditioned to approach things strictly from an academic perspective. We very rarely do people actually consider themselves as professionals who have a professional contract that they need to uphold and defend and stand their ground on. And this is an opportunity to continue to change that mindset and continue to build on the strength of the union to be able to take bigger battles in the future and continue taking battles to continue restoring all sorts of facets of our profession. And that the desires for a multi-year pay deal, whilst we've described the immense challenges and difficulties in actually trying to achieve that because of all of the sorts of risks, that the political risks that the government would have to take, potentially breeds complacency. And I'd ask doctors to consider, when, particularly resident doctors, when you become the consultants or SAS or GP doctors of the future, how are you going to defend your paying conditions then? Or when we win pay restoration, albeit potentially in a few years' time, what are you going to do afterwards? How are you going to defend our pay from being eroded in the future? The only answer and the only way of defending our pay is through the union and through taking action year after year if we have to.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Vivek. Thank you so much for joining me on Medics Money, and please send me an email if you have any thoughts on what you've just heard. Thank you.